I want you to imagine a scenario for a second. It sounds like something out of a thriller novel, but it is 100% true.
Okay, I'm listening.
It's 1926. You're in a dusty old monastery in Piedmont, Italy. You're sifting through records looking for, I don't know, boring administrative papers. You open a crate that's been sealed since Napoleon's time, and inside, you find the lost works of William Shakespeare.
Wow. Okay, that's a staggering image. And in the world of music, that is pretty much exactly what happened.
It really is, because the subject of our deep dive today, Antonio Vivaldi, is someone we all think we know. We hear the Four Seasons everywhere.
Oh, everywhere. It's in elevators, it's on hold music with your bank, car commercials.
It's the definition of ubiquitous. But the reality, the really shocking reality, is that for almost 200 years, the world had completely and totally forgotten he even existed.
It's one of the great cultural amnesias in history. I mean, if it weren't for this very specific detective story that happens in the 1920s, which I'm sure we'll get to,
Oh, we will.
Vivaldi would be a footnote. He'd be a sentence in a biography of Johann Sebastian Bach, and that's it.
And that's our mission today. We're not just here to, hum the melody for spring. We're going to uncover the man behind the music, because his life was just this incredible paradox.
Total contradiction.
We're talking about a Catholic priest who, for all intents and purposes, refused to say Mass. He was a man who ran what was basically the 18th century equivalent of a Broadway production company. And he composed his most timeless masterpieces inside a state-run home for abandoned girls.
It's a story that just doesn't seem real. The Red Priest of Venice, who lived like a celebrity impresario and ultimately died like a pauper.
So for this deep dive, we're pulling from a lot of established scholarship. Biographies, historical records, and a lot of this is, really well summarized in places like the main academic entries online, which give you a fantastic overview of his life and the rediscovery of his work.
Right, it gives us the roadmap to follow the story.
So let's set the scene. We're in Venice. It's the tail end of the 17th century. And you have to understand, Venice at this time is, well, it's kind of a party town, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The Republic of Venice is in its sunset phase. Its military and political power is fading. The trade routes are not what they used to be. But the culture, the art, the tourism, it's exploding.
It's the Las Vegas of Europe.
It really is. It's a city of masks, of carnival, of incredible music and theater. It's decadent.
And right in the middle of all this opulent decay, Antonio Vivaldi is born, March 4th, 1678. And the drama, it starts literally from his first breath.
It does. When you look at the baptismal records, something immediately jumps out at you. He wasn't baptized in a church.
A midwife did it right there in the bedroom.
Immediately. And in 17th century Catholic Europe, an emergency home baptism means one thing and one thing only.
They thought he was going to die.
On the spot. You're in a race against time to save the infant's soul because you're convinced the body is about to expire.
There's always been this story, this kind of romantic legend, that a big earthquake hit Venice on the day he was born, and that the panic is what caused the midwife to rush the baptism.
It's a great story. It gives his birth this, cinematic, almost epic quality. Born amidst the tremors, biographers loved it for centuries.
But it's not true.
Well, when you actually cross-reference the geological records, the big earthquake people talk about actually happened in 1688.
A full decade later.
Exactly. So the earthquake baby theory, as good as it sounds, just doesn't hold up. The reality was much more personal and probably much scarier for his parents. The baby was just incredibly frail.
And that frailty, that physical weakness, it ends up defining his entire life. But before we get to his health, let's look at his family. The Vivaldis weren't exactly aristocrats.
Not even close. His father, Giovanni Battista Vivaldi, started his career as a barber.
And we should clarify, right? A barber back then wasn't just giving shaves and trims.
No, it was a trade. It often involved things like minor surgery, dentistry, bloodletting. It was a very working-class, hands-on job.
But Giovanni makes this incredible career pivot. He goes from being a barber to a professional violinist. And not just any violinist, he ends up in the orchestra of St. Mark's Basilica. That's like going from playing in a garage band to the New York Philharmonic.
It's a huge leap, and it shows that in Venice, musical talent was a path to social mobility. And Giovanni was serious. He wasn't just a player. He was one of the founders of a musicians' guild, the Sovegno dei Musicisti di Santa Cecilia.
Like a musicians' union?
Very early version of one, yeah. He was a professional to the core. So Antonio, his son, grows up in this world. He's touring Venice, playing violin alongside his dad. They were a duo.
And he inherits two key things from Giovanni, the incredible musical talent and, well, the hair.
The famous red hair. That's where the nickname comes from. Il prete rosso, the red priest. It was a family trait, and in a region of Italy where most people have darker features, a family of redheads would have really stood out.
It became his brand.
Before people had brands, yeah.
But let's circle back to that health issue, because this is so central to understanding why he wrote the way he did, why he lived the way he did. The sources all mention this condition called strettezza di petto.
Literally tightness of the chest.
And if you look at the symptoms described through a modern medical lens, what are we talking about here?
We're almost certainly talking about a severe form of bronchial asthma.
Now think about that. You're an aspiring musician in the Baroque era. Asthma is a potential career killer for at least half the instruments in any orchestra.
Oh, easily. You can't play the oboe. You can't play the flute, the trumpet, the horn. You simply do not have the lung capacity or control to sustain the column of air required. If Vivaldi's passion had been for wind instruments, we would never have heard of him. He physically couldn't have done it.
So the violin isn't just a choice for him, it's practically his only option. It's his lifeline.
It becomes the path of least resistance for his lungs, but, the path of maximum expression for his talent. It's a classic case of compensation. All that energy, all that ambition that he couldn't channel through his breath, he funnels directly into his fingers.
And this path eventually leads him, perhaps surprisingly, to the priesthood. He starts studying at 15, he's ordained at 25 in 1703, but this is where the story gets it. Well, a bit suspicious for me. He becomes a priest, and then he almost immediately stops doing the main job of a priest.
It's one of the most peculiar priesthoods on record.
Yeah.
Within about a year of his ordination, he formally stops celebrating Mass. He gets a dispensation.
And the official reason given is his health, the asthma. The idea being that he might have a coughing fit at the altar, or that the incense would trigger an attack.
And, to be fair, that's plausible. A cold, damp, incense-filled stone church is probably the worst possible environment for a severe asthmatic.
Yeah.
But you also have to look at the timing and the consequences.
He stops saying Mass, and suddenly his schedule is wide open.
Wide open. To compose, to teach, to rehearse. He kept the title, he wore the robes, he was still technically a priest, but he lived the life of a full-time musician.
There's that famous story, I think it comes from a French visitor, that Vivaldi was in the middle of saying Mass one day. He has a musical idea, a fugue theme or something, and he just leaves the altar, runs into the sacristy to write it down, and then comes back to finish the service.
It's almost certainly apocryphal, but the fact that the story even existed tells you everything you need to know about how people saw him. He was a man whose true vocation was music, and the priesthood was, well, something else. A title, a protection, maybe.
And that new life, that musical life, brings him to the institution that will define his career, the Ospedale della Pietà.
Right.
Now, when I first read about this, my mind immediately went to, like, a Dickensian orphanage. Grim walls, kids eating gruel, Oliver Twist asking for more. But that's not what this was, is it?
Not at all. The Ospedale was a unique Venetian institution. And yes, at its heart, it was a home for foundlings, for abandoned children.
Right.
Often they were the illegitimate daughters of noblemen and their mistresses.
And they were left in the scaffetta, right? Which was this kind of anonymous drop box for babies.
Exactly. It was a revolving wooden cylinder built into the wall of the church. A mother could place her infant inside, turn the cylinder, ring a bell, and disappear into the night, knowing the child would be cared for by the state.
Because the Republic of Venice funded this place. It wasn't just a charity, it was a state project.
A very well-funded one. And this is where the gender divide becomes crucial. The boys who were raised there, they were taught a trade, stone cutting, shoemaking, something practical. And at age 15, they were sent out into the world to make a living.
But the girls were different. The talented ones, the figli di coro, they were kept.
They were the investment. The Pietà essentially functioned as a world-class, all-female music conservatory. And you have to remember, this is happening at a time when women were almost completely barred from professional music making, especially in the church.
So in 1703, the same year he's ordained, Vivaldi walks into this job as the maestro di violino, the violin master. He's a priest in charge of an all-female orchestra. That is, for all intents and purposes, locked away from the world.
And that sense of mystery was part of the appeal. The girls performed from a gallery high up in the church, and they were hidden behind a metal grill, a grotta.
So the audience could hear them, but they couldn't see them clearly. They were just these ethereal silhouettes.
Which, of course, drove the tourists absolutely wild. We have accounts from travelers all over Europe, people like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who came to Venice specifically to hear the angels of the Pietà. This idea of hearing heavenly music made by invisible women was an incredible draw.
And for Vivaldi as a composer, this must have been a dream scenario, a laboratory, as you said.
It's the perfect setup. He has a captive orchestra. These women don't have families to go home to. They don't have other jobs or social obligations. Their entire life is music. They practiced all day, every day. Their technical skill was, by all accounts, staggering.
It creates this amazing feedback loop, doesn't it? Vivaldi isn't just writing generic concertos. He's writing specifically for the players he has in front of him.
Precisely. He knows that his star violinist, a woman named Anna Maria della Pietà, has this unbelievable dexterity and a killer trill. So what does he do? He writes concertos for her that are packed with impossibly fast passages and intricate trills.
He knows what his instruments can do.
Down to the individual player. He knows that Pellegrina, who plays the oboe, has incredible lung capacity, so he can write these long, lyrical, sustained phrases for her that other players couldn't manage. The music is completely bespoke.
And the sheer volume he had to produce is mind-boggling. We have a copy of one of his later contracts, and it stipulated that he had to provide 2 brand-new concertos every single month.
Think about that workload. 24 concertos a year, on top of teaching lessons, leading rehearsals, maintaining the instruments. It's an industrial scale of production.
It totally explains how we end up with a catalog of over 500 concertos. He wasn't sitting around waiting for the muse to strike. He was on a factory deadline.
And that constant pressure, I think, is what forced him to be so innovative. He couldn't just write the same piece over and over again.
Well, Stravinsky famously joked that Vivaldi didn't write 500 concertos. He wrote the same concerto 500 times.
Right, which is a great line, but it's also incredibly unfair. The reality is, because he had this laboratory of musicians, he was constantly experimenting with form, with instrumentation, with new techniques. He had to, just to keep things interesting for himself and for the players.
And speaking of new techniques, we have to talk about his own playing. He wasn't just a composer and a conductor sitting on the sidelines. He was a virtuoso, a shredder.
He was the Eddie Van Halen of the Baroque violin. There's this fantastic diary entry from a German architect, Johann Friedrich Amann von Uffenbach, who saw Vivaldi perform in 1715. And he wasn't just impressed, he was genuinely shocked, almost scared.
Scared of a violin player.
Uffenbach writes that Vivaldi played an improvised cadenza at the end of a piece that was so astonishing it truly shocked him. He said Vivaldi's fingers got so high up the fingerboard that they were only a straw's breadth from the bridge.
Okay, for any non-violinists listening, let's unpack why that's so significant. You're supposed to play more toward the middle of the string to get a warm sound, playing right up next to the bridge, which is called sol ponticello. What does that do?
It creates a huge amount of tension on the string.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to produce a clean note there. The sound you get is glassy, ethereal, almost metallic and piercing. And to play fast, complex passages in that position requires a level of precision that most players simply don't have. If your finger is off by a millimeter, it sounds like a screeching cat.
So Uffenbach was hearing sounds he didn't think the instrument was capable of making.
Exactly. He said he doubted anyone had ever played that way before or ever would again. Vivaldi was pushing the physical limits of the violin.
And he takes that same boundary-pushing, avant-garde attitude and applies it directly to his composition. Which brings us, of course, to the big one. The piece everyone knows, even if they don't know, they know it, The Four Seasons.
Published in 1725 in Amsterdam. And the first thing we have to do is try to scrub our brains of the pleasant background music reputation this piece has today. When this came out, it was radical. It was shocking.
Because it was program music. It was telling a story.
Correct. Up until then, most instrumental music was absolute music. It was about the interplay of melody, harmony, rhythm. It was abstract. Vivaldi comes along and says, no, this music is about something. It has a narrative.
And he didn't leave it to the imagination. He published the concertos with a set of 4 sonnets, poems, that describe exactly what is happening in the music, moment by moment.
We think he might have written the poems himself. And they line up, measure for measure. It was a multimedia experience for the 18th century. You were meant to read the poem while you listened. So when the poem for spring says, the birds celebrate her return with festive song, you hear the violins twittering and chirping.
And my favorite part of spring is when the poem says, the goat herd sleeps, his faithful dog barking at his side. The music gets very quiet and sleepy, but then the viola part just starts barking.
It's amazing. In the score, he literally writes the words Il cane che grida, the barking dog, over the viola part. And it's not a pretty sound. It's this repetitive, nagging, slightly dissonant note that cuts through the beautiful violin melody.
A lot of modern recordings smooth it over to make it sound nice.
They do, but they're missing the point. Vivaldi meant for it to be annoying. It's a dog barking while you're trying to take a nap. It's realism, it's sound painting.
And he does it all through the cycle. The summer storm, the buzzing mosquitoes.
The drunken dancers in autumn who stumble and pass out.
But for me, winter is the masterpiece of this kind of storytelling. The opening isn't a melody at all. It's just this cold, rhythmic, shivering pulse.
It's the chattering of teeth. He uses a string technique called spiccato, where the bow bounces lightly on the string to create this brittle, shivering effect. You can feel the cold in the Venetian damp just by listening to it.
And then there's the ice skating scene later in the movement.
Which is pure comedy. You hear the solo violin making these long, graceful, gliding motions on the ice. And then suddenly there's this flurry of fast, chaotic, tumbling notes where the skater loses their balance, their feet go out from under them, and they wipe out.
It's slapstick in a violin concerto.
That's why it was so revolutionary. It was visceral, it was entertaining, it was for the public. It wasn't just high-minded academic counterpoint like his contemporary Bach. It was a show.
And a show needs a market. It needs a business model. And this is where we have to pivot to the other side of Vivaldi's life, the side that the Red Priest title tends to obscure. Vivaldi the businessman, the hustler.
Because he wasn't content just to be the music master at an orphanage, even a famous one. He wanted the big money. He wanted the fame. And in the 18th century, that meant one thing.
Opera.
Opera was the blockbuster movie industry of its day. It was where the fortunes were made. And Vivaldi dives headfirst into this world, not just as a composer, but as an impresario.
Explain that job title for us. It sounds glamorous, but I get the feeling it was mostly a massive headache.
It's probably the worst job in the entire artistic world.
Yeah.
An impresario was basically a producer and a general manager. Vivaldi would rent a theater, in his case the Teatro San Angelo. He was then financially responsible for everything. Everything. Hiring the singers, who were notoriously difficult divas, and paying their exorbitant fees. Commissioning the sets and costumes. Buying the wax for the candles to light the place, printing the librettos and the tickets, and crucially, making sure the government censors didn't shut down his production. He was fronting all the cash.
So he was taking all the risk.
All of it. If the opera was a flop, Antonio Vivaldi lost his shirt. If it was a hit, he stood to make a fortune. And for a while, he made a fortune.
But being a priest in the very secular, very scandalous world of opera must have caused some friction.
A huge amount. We see it with the censorship battle over his opera, Arcilda, Regina di Ponto. He writes this opera, gets it all ready to be staged, and the Venetian state censor blocks it at the last minute.
Why? What was the problem?
The plot. It involved the main female character, Arcilda, falling in love with another woman who is secretly her long-lost sister disguised as a man.
A little bit of gender-bending romance.
A bit too much for the censor, who called it indecent and improper. But here's where you see Vivaldi the operator. He doesn't just give up. He lobbies his powerful friends. He rewrites the dedication to the opera. He maybe greases a few palms. And he gets the exact same opera with the exact same plot, approved and staged successfully the very next year.
He knew how to play the game.
He was a master at it. But when you're that successful and that visible, you make enemies. And Vivaldi made a very powerful one in a man named Benedetto Marcello.
Who is Marcello?
He's a nobleman, a magistrate, and a rival composer. And he despised Vivaldi's populist style. So he wrote this satirical pamphlet called Il Teatro alla Moda, the fashionable theater.
It was an attack on Vivaldi.
A savage one. He never uses Vivaldi's name, but it's completely obvious who he's talking about. The cover has a caricature of an angel wearing a priest's hat playing a violin.
Not exactly subtle.
Not at all. And inside, he uses an anagram of Vivaldi's name, Aldiviva, and mocks everything about him. His fast, show-offy music, his commercialism, the way he managed his singers. It was a public takedown by a member of the establishment.
And the thing that probably gave his enemies the most ammunition was his personal life, specifically his relationship with the singer Anna Giraud.
This was the scandal that followed him for the rest of his life. Anna Giraud was a young singer who became his student, his protege, and eventually the star of his operas, his prima donna.
And she and her sister Paulina moved in with him.
They did. So now you have the Red Priest, a man in his late 40s, early 50s, living with two young women. And he travels all over Europe with them for his opera productions.
I mean, the optics of that are not good.
They're terrible for the time. And people talked. We know that the Cardinal of Ferrara at one point actually banned Vivaldi from entering a city to stage an opera precisely because of this scandalous cohabitation.
And Vivaldi's defense was always his asthma, right? I'm a sick man, these women are my nurses.
That was his story, and he stuck to it. He wrote these long, furious letters to his patrons, insisting that the relationship was purely professional and medical. He claimed they helped him with his health. And to be clear, there's no actual evidence of a romantic relationship. But in the court of public opinion, the verdict was already in.
So you have this man juggling 3 different worlds. The sacred world of the church, the cloistered world of the orphanage, and the cutthroat commercial world of the opera house. He becomes incredibly rich, he's famous across Europe, he's even knighted by the Holy Roman Emperor Charles VI, and then it all falls apart.
And it happens with breathtaking speed. By the late 1730s, Vivaldi is in his 60s. And musical tastes, especially in a trend-chasing city like Venice, were changing fast.
The Baroque style was going out of fashion.
It was. All that complexity, the ornamentation, the intricate counterpoint, it was starting to sound old-fashioned. The new galant style was coming in, which was simpler, cleaner, more elegant. Vivaldi's music was suddenly seen as outmoded.
He became a dinosaur overnight.
Pretty much. The Venetian public, who had once adored him, stopped buying tickets to his operas. He was losing money hand over fist. So he makes this one last desperate gamble. He decides to leave Venice for good.
He bets everything on Vienna.
He does. He had this great connection with the emperor, Charles VI, who was a huge admirer of his music. The story goes that the emperor talked more to Vivaldi in one meeting than he did to his own ministers in 2 years.
So Vivaldi's plan is to go to Vienna, get a cushy position as a composer at the imperial court, and live out his retirement in comfort and prestige.
That was the plan. He sells off huge bundles of his manuscripts, his life's work, for what are described as paltry prices, just to raise the cash for the journey. He packs up and arrives in Vienna in 1740. And then history deals him the cruelest possible hand.
He gets there, ready to start his new life, and almost immediately, Emperor Charles VI dies.
It's an absolute catastrophe for him. The emperor is dead. A period of official mourning is declared, which means all the theaters and concert halls are shut down. There's a succession crisis. His patron is gone, and the city is in lockdown.
He's stranded.
Completely. A foreigner in a strange city, in winter, with no job, no income, and no protector. The fall from grace into poverty is instantaneous and brutal.
And he dies less than a year later.
In July of 1741, at the age of 63, the official cause of death in the parish records is internal infection. And the funeral records, they're just heartbreaking to read.
We have the actual receipt from the church, don't we?
We do. The total cost was 19 florins and 45 kreuzers. For context, that is a certified pauper's burial, the absolute cheapest funeral you could get. They paid for the Kleingeleit,
Which means?
the small bells. It was the cheapest peal of bells at the cathedral, just a few symbolic dings to mark that someone had died, no ceremony.
No orchestra playing his music, no choir singing his Gloria.
Nothing. Absolute silence. He was sewn into a simple sack, carried to the public hospital cemetery, and buried in a common grave. A grave that was later dug up and built over. We don't even know where his remains are.
I have to ask about the Haydn story. The legend is that a very young Joseph Haydn, who was a choir boy at the cathedral nearby, sang at Vivaldi's funeral. Any truth to that?
It's a lovely romantic idea, this passing of the torch from Baroque to classical. And Haydn was indeed a choir boy there at the time. But given that it was a pauper's burial, the cheapest possible rate, there would have been no music, no choir. So it's almost certainly a myth. Vivaldi went into the ground with no fanfare and no music.
And then, nothing. For almost 200 years.
And this is the part of the story that is so hard for us to comprehend today. We think of the great composers as this fixed, permanent canon. Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, Vivaldi. But in the 18th and 19th centuries, Vivaldi was gone, wiped from the map.
But Bach knew his work.
Bach was the great exception. Bach deeply admired Vivaldi's concertos and transcribed several of them for keyboard instruments as a way to study them. For nearly 2 centuries, the only reason anyone remembered the name Vivaldi at all was because he was mentioned in footnotes in biographies of Bach. People thought he was just some minor Italian composer who influenced the great master.
So how do we get from being a footnote in a Bach biography to being the soundtrack for a Super Bowl commercial?
The revival starts very slowly in the early 20th century. The great violinist Fritz Kreisler wrote a concerto in the style of Vivaldi, which sparked a little bit of interest. But the big bang, the moment everything changes, is 1926.
Back to the monastery in Piedmont.
Exactly. The Salesian College there wanted to do some renovations, and they decided to sell off some old books and papers to raise money. They called in an expert from the National Library in Turin, a musicologist named Alberto Gentili, to appraise the collection.
And Gentili starts opening these crates.
And he realizes he is not looking at dusty old theology texts. He finds 14 massive, bound volumes of manuscripts. It is the personal, private collection of Antonio Vivaldi.
300 concertos, 19 operas, the Gloria.
All of it. Music no one had heard or seen in centuries. It turns out the collection had been sold off by Vivaldi's heirs, passed through a noble family, and was eventually donated to the monastery, where it was mislabeled and sat on a shelf completely forgotten through the Napoleonic Wars, the Industrial Revolution, and World War I.
It's just staggering how fragile it all is. If that monastery had had a fire, if a water pipe had burst in that room.
We wouldn't know the Four Seasons. It really is that simple. The piece we consider the bedrock of classical music would just not exist for us.
But what blows my mind is that the story doesn't end in 1926. We are still finding lost Vivaldi works.
That's the most exciting part of this whole story. The catalog is still growing. It's a living thing. In 2005, a musicologist was digging through the archives of the Berlin Sing Academy, an archive that had been looted by the Soviets after World War II and only returned in the 90s. And in that collection, he found most of the score to Vivaldi's lost opera, Montezuma.
An opera about the Aztec emperor.
Written by Vivaldi. Then, just a year later, in 2006, another lost opera, Argipo, turns up in an archive in Prague. In 2015, a previously unknown flute sonata is identified in Dresden. It's still happening.
It makes you look at every dusty library shelf in Europe and wonder what's on it.
It absolutely should.
So let's bring this all together. We started this deep dive looking for the man behind the elevator music. And I think we found someone who was so much more than a one-hit wonder.
We found an industrialist of music, a man who understood that great art doesn't always come from some divine, mystical inspiration. Sometimes it comes from deadlines. It comes from constraints. It comes from having to write a new piece by Friday for a specific girl with a specific talent in a specific room.
And we found a survivor. A man who survived the asthma that should have ended his career before it began. He survived the censors, the critics, the changing fashions, and in the end, he even survived being completely forgotten for 2 centuries to become one of the most famous and beloved composers in history.
The ultimate irony is that the Red Priest, who was buried in a pauper's grave without a single note of music, is now the guy whose work essentially keeps the classical recording industry afloat. Sales of the Four Seasons pay the bills for all the less famous stuff.
Before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought that kind of haunts me after digging into all this. We talked about the numbers. In one of his letters, Vivaldi himself claimed that he wrote 94 operas.
And so far, we've only found the music for about 50 of them, in whole or in part.
Which means there are roughly 40 to 45 Vivaldi operas that are just missing, gone.
That we know of, yes.
So here's the question for you to mull over. If we were still finding complete operas as recently as 2005 and 2006, what other masterpieces might be sitting right now in a cardboard box in a church basement in Italy or a private library in Prague just waiting for someone to open the lid?
It is entirely possible, I'd even say statistically probable, that a work of music equal to or even greater than the Four Seasons is out there right now, gathering dust, waiting to be played for the very first time in 300 years.
And on that note, I'm going to go check my attic. Thanks for listening to this deep dive.